I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Honda HR-V, one of the more popular small SUVs on the Australian market. This HR-V has been out and available in this country for a few years now, and it's faced a real onslaught in recent times from new competitors like the Volkswagen T-Cross and the Skoda Karoq, as well as old faithfuls like the Mazda CX-3, although that car is a little bit smaller and less practical than this real TARDIS of a car in the HR-V. So in this video, I want to work out how well this Honda is aging. Is it still a car that you should consider if what you're looking for is a small crossover to be a nice, easy runabout around town, easy to park, while giving you that elevated driving position? So in today's video, we'll do our usual thing. We'll jump inside, check out the interior, the practicality in the back seat and the boot, and then take the Honda HR-V out for a drive to see how it stacks up dynamically. But before we do so, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell below. It makes a big difference. And if at any point you've got a comment on the HR-V, leave it in the comments box below. All right, let's get started. Inside, the HR-V is one of the clearest examples that I've ever seen of a car with really strong high points and also some increasing low points that Honda still haven't addressed. And I'm going to speak to those in turn. But first, on the good side, Honda really make this car well. Quality feels top notch, and the materials that they use in here are strangely luxurious for this segment. This RS model costs about $32,000, so it's not that cheap to buy, but the materials in here are a lot nicer than you'd get on a Volkswagen T-Cross at this price. And to illustrate that point, there's a really creamy leather steering wheel, there's leather or faux leather covering all of the door, even down here where your leg comes to rest, which is really nice. So there is a feeling of prestige and quality in the HR-V that you might not expect. Similarly, the seats are covered in that really squidgy kind of Honda leather, which certainly looks and feels nice, but the actual shape of the seat isn't ideal. The squab is quite short, so if you have shorter legs, you'll be really comfortable, but if you have longer legs, you might find them sort of draped a little bit more uncomfortably. Other aspects of the interior that are great include the simple functionality of the climate controls down here and the practicality. So we have big deep cup holders here with fold out slats for different sizes of drinks, another little deep central box here between the seats, an adjustable armrest. So all in all, it does feel smartly thought out. But, and there is a but, as I flagged, the downside is the technology feels incredibly dated in the HR-V now. Now this is, I think, the second refresh of the screen that Honda Australia choose to specify for the HR-V, and it's still really below par. It now has wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is good because the integrated software is a dog's breakfast. It looks low res, doesn't feel specific to a Honda, it feels pretty aftermarket, and so I just feel like it's a missed opportunity to integrate some really nice tech. And even on this grade, there's no integrated navigation, so you kind of do have to use your smartphone mirroring. Similarly, in front of you, you have old school gauges, no digital speedometer, and the trip computer itself looks really aged now. So if all you want is transport that's really practical and also decent to drive, as we'll find out in a second, the HR-V is a good choice. But if you're looking for a higher tech interior, a Volkswagen T-Cross will cream the Honda HR-V. So it's a mixed bag up front. Let's check out the back seat. Despite being really compact outside and therefore easy to maneuver through the city, Honda did a really good job on packaging the HR-V. This is one of the absolute best points of this car, is just how spacious and usable it is. And so here in the back, you can see I've got lots of room. I'm 6 foot, headroom is really great, lots of it. Legroom similarly behind my own driving position's generous, and toe room is also fine. Plus the floor is virtually completely flat, and so you can actually get 3 people across. But if you can see this middle seat, it's a perch if I've ever seen one. Thankfully, that roofline is pretty high. Now the seats aren't especially comfortable, but the space on offer is good, and so for carpooling or whatever, the HR-V will be just fine. And impressively, those soft materials actually continue here in the back. We also have a single cup holder and a 12-volt socket down here, which is good because there's no flip down armrest, so that's your drink storage. But the HR-V's trump card is its magic seat feature. Just like on the Jazz, you can lift up the bench, locking it in like so, That stays up, and you can therefore transport taller items here in the back. So stuff like maybe a bookcase or a pot plant, that's going to be nice and easy. And you still keep one seat, but both of them fold up in the same way. So I personally reckon that's pretty cool. And the practicality story continues in the boot, and that's where we're going now. Here around the back of the HR-V, I actually reckon the design of this small crossover is aging pretty well. I certainly don't mind the way it looks, and the kind of cool integration of those rear door handles as well is still a slightly funky touch on this little SUV. But what this back end is hiding is a really practical boot. At 437 litres, the Honda HR-V packs much more cargo capacity than most vehicles in this segment. And that's another product of what I mentioned before with that really low floor plan in this car. It just means that there's a lot of vertical space. So you'll be able to stack stuff a little bit higher. You can use the boot even if you're using those flip-up magic seats in the back. By way of special features, there aren't really many. There's no kind of pockets off to the side or shopping bag hooks. And as for the cargo cover, it's this really flimsy thing that you just slide in. But down below the boot floor, there is a little bit of extra storage and also a full-size spare wheel, which is a really good peace of mind if you're going to use this car out in the countryside. Plus, it's really easy to just reach forward and manually flip down those back seats. Now, the tailgate is manual, but there are gas struts, and it's assisted just enough such that I reckon almost anyone would be able to open and close this boot without issue. Now, with that out of the way, we'll jump into the driver's seat and see how the HR-V goes on road. So, what is the Honda HR-V like to drive? This isn't the first HR-V that we've driven together, but it's been a couple of years at least since I've been behind the wheel of one of these little Honda crossovers, so it pays to kind of check in on how they're going every now and then, see how competitive it is, because as we know, the small SUV set has really come a long way in a pretty short space of time, and it can be a bit of a danger if you're just standing still hoping the competition doesn't catch up. And that's kind of the way it goes for the HR-V. There are still some aspects of the driving experience that are really nice, and I'll get to those in a second. But one area where it is starting to feel a little dated is in the engine department, because we have a 1.8 litre naturally aspirated single overhead cam petrol 4-cylinder here, producing 105 kilowatts of power and 172 Newton meters of torque. So while the outputs themselves aren't that far off something like a turbo 3-cylinder Volkswagen T-Cross, it just goes about making its power in a rather old-fashioned way. Naturally aspirated isn't really a problem, but it's more like the really dated aspects of this engine that means the HR-V struggles to be as economical as some rivals, and the fact that we've managed to get sort of 8.59 litres per 100 Ks across our week with this SUV illustrates that, particularly given this vehicle is pretty light, so it's not like it's dragging around too much weight. It only weighs 1,300 kilos before you put me in it, so it's a relative featherweight. So there's no reason for it to be burning so much petrol, but at least you don't have to put premium in it. As for how the engine actually goes, it's not too bad. It's a reasonably decent partner to the CVT Auto in the HR-V in all but stressful driving situations. So if you find yourself approaching a steep hill at 80, 90, 100, it's going to start hunting around looking for the right place for the CVT to be driving, if you will, but most of the time you don't even notice it, and this engine's still a fine combo for just sort of nipping about town and the occasional faster trip on the highway. It's just the fuel consumption really that's a bit irksome. Now, I did mention there are still some good parts of the HR-V's driving experience, and that includes the handling, which is actually surprisingly nice, and you can tell that, you know, there's kind of the spirit of a 90s Honda underneath here. Of course, that was the era in which Hondas were all great to drive, and you can still feel that underneath the HR-V. The steering is pretty decent, the handling is flat and offers a little bit of engagement for the keen driver, which is something I'd forgotten about in the HR-V. We took this out on some pretty good country roads and found that there really is something to be had from driving this a little bit harder than normal. The only thing that stops you from kind of really getting silly with the HR-V is that the stability control system kind of clamps on, clamps off. It doesn't blend in nicely, so it does stop you from kind of exploiting the reasonably high limits of this chassis, but everything else feels pretty in sync with the HR-V. The ride quality is okay. The RS grade actually got a sport-specific suspension when this vehicle was facelifted relatively recently, and so the body control is actually all right, but you do feel urban imperfections a little bit through into the cabin, but I wouldn't call it uncomfortable. However, what does feel a little cheap is the lack of refinement. It's quite a noisy vehicle in the cabin, especially over coarse chip. It's really, really loud. So it's not as relaxing as some rivals in the class like the Mazda CX-30, which is a really quiet car. Also, on the safety front, it's good that Honda have been able to get AEB across the range for the HR-V, but they're just being left behind by rivals for the rest of the suite. So even though this car is $33,000 list and kind of like upper 30s drive away, we don't have lane keep assist, we don't have adaptive cruise control, or even blind spot monitoring, which is a little bit of a shock now at this price point. So that kind of tells the story of the HR-V. Still reasonably good to drive, but when it comes to tech and also refinement, it just feels a little behind the 8 ball. So those are our detailed opinions on the 2020 Honda HR-V. I reckon this small SUV still looks pretty good, and there's absolutely no arguing with the practicality of this vehicle. As small crossovers go, it's one of the easiest to live with every day if what you need to carry is people and stuff. But in terms of dynamics, and especially in terms of cabin tech, it is starting to feel its age, and we'd like to see an overhaul of that sort of thing pretty soon. But let me know what you think of the HR-V down below in the comments box. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.